Mixed race people, from a historic context, have always kind of had this kind of love-hate relationship with black men in particular, because the black man has often been blamed for the plight and circumstances of the black family, and they've been blamed by white people for the aspects and components of racism, and then now they double up, and mixed race people retaliate against black men because they use black men to be the blame for the instability that can come as a result of a mixed race person from a divided home or a broken home. So some kind of way these characters have managed to blame all of the cultural issues socially on the black man, whether the black man actually does something or not. See, a mixed race person is kind of like permanent evidence that some type of interaction between races has occurred. You can't have a biracial person made by two people of the same race, if you will. It has to come as a result of people with different skin tones and complexions and what have you in terms of race, because mixed race people, generally speaking, have certain characteristics that indicate mixed genes. The hair takes a different texture, the skin tone takes a different texture, and a lot of the attitudes take take on a different form, because think about the way the people that were the racists thought about it. I mean, if you're trying to create the ultimate white person and a mixed race person shows up who has white characteristics as a person, but they still look like they're black or mixed or Latino or whatever the mixed race person looks like, they were treated as a person that was black in the past. If you had one drop of black blood, is what they used to say, you were considered a black person. This was during the time when some people were saying that a black person wasn't even a whole man, that they were only 3/5 of a man. I mean, think about the degradation to humanity itself in the name of skin color. Black people were said to be savage, incapable of function and structure, with a propensity for sexual violation, so much so that if you gave them the opportunity to be around women, that they would lose their control of their sexual discretion, and that they would become a beast and become a threat to endanger that woman or attack her. And so this is a good illustration for me, being around the area where my uncle is, where you can see what the contribution is of the women who create the black men that were labeled in such a way, where you can see the kind of feral, uninhibited, savage, uncivilized level of the woman in a way that's so vivid, it makes you ask questions about what lives in the women who kind of hide behind a facade, if you will. See, a person can look outwardly through materialism like a different person than they actually are. A savage, unstable, uncivilized person can put on some adornments and some ornamentation, some decoration, makeup, and look like somebody sophisticated, but really be somebody else. And that's what people kind of refer to as that mask of sanity. And so think about what it means. For example, I saw a couple today where there was a white man with a black woman. And what happens when the black woman goes the other direction? What is the consequence, or what is the benefit. And a lot of this stuff about studying mixed races started long ago. Quincy Jones, Diana Ross, Roxy Roker, and several people had mixed race children. And they made a cultural investment in a certain kind of diversity to benefit mixed race people in the future. And obviously, mixed race people are going to support other mixed race people, and they have their own part of American culture that they want to tell, being in the middle, so to speak, where they have to represent both the black and the white, where they can play whatever side they choose to, and that's where the Obama factor comes in. A man said to me one time, and this was a really black guy. I mean, he had all those features that look like the stereotypes. He just came up and said, a lot of black men like you have a problem with Barack Obama, is what he said to me. And I thought to myself, well, for you to say something like that, I think it must be you that has a problem with Barack Obama, because you wouldn't have Barack Obama in the scope of your mind and me unless you've given some careful consideration and thought to that. But I didn't respond to him in that way. I told him, I said, I don't have a problem with Barack Obama as a person. He seems like a nice guy, but I don't agree with his policies. I don't agree with some of his approach to some of the social issues of today. But as a personal person, I don't know Barack Obama to decide whether or not I like him or don't like him. And so I asked him, I said, well, what made you say that? Well, what he was doing was displacing his own frustration about his own self-identity through somebody else. So he was kind of transferring his personal frustration through another person to try to make it seem like, hey, I'm okay. It was the other black guy that had this issue. And I thought to myself, I said, now why would he do that? Well, he has served in the military, and his life has been turned upside down in many ways, and he knows he's reached a point where the odds of him overcoming what he has accumulated as his problems in his life are not something that he's going to overcome unless some extraordinary circumstances come into play. And so now he's the one that's actually looking for someone to blame because he got himself lost. The one thing I never let myself do, in spite of all of this that I've encountered, was let myself get lost in the sense of not knowing who I am or where I was trying to go, what I was trying to do. Sometimes getting lost is good if you're trying to discover something that's yet to be determined. But I never was out here trying to figure out, well, who am I and what am I? I was raised upon certain principles. And so I raised a lot of questions for myself about this thing that involves mixed races, because if we're really all human beings, why does that matter? And I have a lot of questions for mixed race people that they don't usually get to be honest and upfront about, because I know mixed race people that are more prejudiced towards black people than white people. And I know some mixed race people who are extremely prejudiced towards white people. And so all of it becomes a social burden, because I'm not sure you really get anything out of racism. I'm not really sure that you really get anything except class separation. I think you can get more with diversity, but people fear losing their race identity, and that's why they were trying to keep everything separated, if you will, because it's hard to create a genetic heritage, a genetic lineage. If you just keep mixing things up too much, you don't know where anybody really came from. And so now is the time when we have more mixed race people in America than we've ever had. And they're looking for their own cultural identity, their own cultural inclusion, because they know the benefit of being in part white, and they know the drawback of being part black, and a lot of them are very angry about it because they don't really fit in definitively any place except amongst biracial people unless they pick a side. And most of them don't want to really have to pick a side. And so the black man kind of gets blamed, if you will, for causing this disruption, so to speak. But stable, healthy, educated family people, they're not hung up on some of these kinds of racial issues when it comes to stuff like that, like most people are. But some people are so hung up on race that they get stuck there. Now, why is this so important now? It's important now for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is the fact that once black people reach a point with this museum that's opening where they can't say they were left out, where they can't say they never got their opportunity, where they can't say that they're still fighting for their own unique identity in the country to be respected, suddenly that opens the door up to more diversity. And all these mixed race people, they're already here. And unfortunately, and I hate to make it sound like this, most people that are associated with mixed race people or who have mixed race children, they're trying to figure out, well, okay, well, what are we going to do with our biracial family? What are we going to do with our biracial children? How are we going to raise them in a world that's divisive? And so a lot of mixed race people have tried to figure out how to establish their own unique identity to tell their version of the American experience, being in the middle of what created the race division and polarization in the country from the very start. They feel that they have their own unique story, but they can't tell that story without taking something from black people. They can't tell that story without taking something from white people. And so black people are saying, hey, you're not all the way black. You don't know the whole thing. You're not qualified. And white people are saying, well, hey, wait a minute. You're not pure white either. And, well, you can't just be taking our history and our legacy in that kind of way. And so they end up frustrated because they're in the middle. And they're always having to jump from side to side depending on where they want to be or where they're at to survive. A black person can at least say that, all right, well, I know that there's trouble, but I know where other people are who are just like me. And white people can say, well, hey, I know where other white people are. Well, where do mixed race people fit to that equation? And so a lot of them are starting to tell their own story about what they know about the ills of society. And so when people see Colin Kaepernick, for example, taking these positions that seem unpatriotic, and they're wondering what that's really all about, he has finally come to the point where he understands clearly the kinds of things that I'm describing and the kind of oppression and disenfranchisement and inequality and discrimination that comes as a result of the behavioral patterns in this country. Because the mixed race people feel it more so than anybody because they're taking hits from both sides. See, black people, usually they're only taking their hits from one side primarily, and the other races of people that act adversely against black people are behaving for acceptance by white people. And the thought scares white people that are extremist and racist because if Asians, Latinos, blacks, biracial people, and other ethnicities, Arabic or what have you, come together, it starts to challenge this whole idea of race superiority and white privilege because it can end up overwhelming the number of white people there are.